Alright, welcome back to Learn to Draw Comics with me, your host, Nick Fights, here at Lead-Based Studios. Today I'm going to be talking about my process of drawing and creating comic artwork and everything. Everyone's process probably pretty different, but the most fundamental thing to remember is it is a process. It's not instantaneous. The process of creating the comic artwork that you want to create, it's going to take patience, it's going to take time, you have to build it. If you go and you look at an architect that has to build a house, the foreman that shows up, all the workers that show up, it's a process. They don't show up the first day, put down the foundation, and boom, there's a whole house. So just like building a house, building a drawing or an illustration is the same thing. You got to build your way up. And what we're really doing is we're getting our ideas on paper. And it's okay to change your idea. It's okay to change your mind about certain stuff. So if you have an idea set and you're trying to work towards it, you may not get it the first time. That's okay. Don't get dissuaded. Don't be, it'll happen. So you keep moving past that. Keep slowly working it, grinding it in the direction that you want it to go. Round off the edges like a sculptor. Get rid of the things that you don't need. So once you get rid of all the excess waste, you leave behind the things that you need. Before you know it, you've got final artwork. So I want to talk about my process. Now recently I did a sketch that was a freebie sketch for a fan who met me at Free Comic Book Day. And I'd promised him a sketch because he waited in line for so long and yet still had to go, and so he missed his opportunity. There was just a line of people ahead of him getting free sketches. So I promised him, I was like, go ahead, contact me via Facebook and I'll get a sketch out to you. So the sketch was the characters Alice Cooper versus Freddy Krueger. So I had a little bit of fun with it. Looked up some references, grabbed some pretty iconic looks for both of the characters. Freddy Krueger's never really changed. They've just deviated his color of his sweater, the amount of stripes, but he's usually pretty straightforward. 4 claws, 1 hand, easy enough. But my process of thinking about this led me into thinking, who would Alice Cooper be as a scrapper? So I toiled with this idea of who would actually win. So while I was working through sketching, these are my exact thumbnails that led me down that path. Here I've got nothing more than an oval for each head, and sort of a curve line for the slope of each of their backs, and then just a little bit of something here in the middle, just a little bit of arms, legs, or something or other, just motion. I'm just capturing motion. These are very, very small thumbnails, basic gestures. And then once I realized, well, okay, this is a nice composition, I'm going to build off of this, just like putting the foundation down for the house like I talked about. So I built off of that. I went for that sort of triangular composition where it's going to be larger near the bottom and the pinnacle of it's going to be near the top. So obviously that's where you're going to want to put a character's head in that composition. Lower in the rest of the pyramid, we can go ahead and lose the figure of the other character, which we want to be either losing the battle or currently seems like it's down and out and they're about to return. Whenever doing a fighting composition like this, you never officially want... Oh, let me go ahead and... There I am. Oh, I've been disappeared from my own video. I forgot to check the thing. Anyway, let's move on. So you never really want one character to completely dominate the fight. You always want the chance or the believability that one character is going to come back. So one thing I did define in this simplistic pose is that I wanted one over the top winning, and this one looks like they're down and out, but the head's still up. That means there's still hope. Down and out would be the head's completely tilted down, dominated, submissive, they've lost the fight, they're saddened. So I did start coming up with this kind of motion, the same motion from before. One above, a lot of energy back and forth, a lot of twisting and turning and writhing out of the lower character, because you know, if you're losing the battle, I used to be in wrestling, if you're losing, you're going to try to squirm out of it. So in this thumbnail right here, I started working in this idea that because he's down and out, he's got an arm maybe underneath him catching him, the other one's got arms coming down, sort of following the flow of that pyramid shape. And the next one I focused more on the actual energy back and forth, like are they throwing punches? Is there an arm swinging up and around this way? Is the top person throwing a punch down that direction? So I started thinking again more of the characters. Alice Cooper's not going to be much of a punch thrower. He's not really going to be a, stick 'em up, fisticuffs kind of guy. Because of his stage shows, he's always using props. He's got a riding crop. He has someone come out and whip him. He gets latched up in a straitjacket, gets beheaded, a lot of other crazy awesome stuff. And all for the sake of entertainment, but usually he's the one being abused. Even with his riding crop, he's slapping himself the whole time. He's not hitting other people. Yet if I focused on the lyrics of some of his songs, he does tend to come off as like a crusader of right and wrong or moral ambiguity, sort of like as a reminder for other people to get their morals set straight. So with that, I figured out of all the bad things Freddy Krueger had done, that would be all the given reason why Alice Cooper would sort of descend upon him. So as I kept moving on with my thumbnails, I was like, well, wondering, okay, well then how far would I go with that? What if I had him completely dominating him at the top of the pyramid? And so in this thumbnail here, I got the torso of the second person in the bottom. Arms are kind of outstretched, like he's being grappled, like he's just being wrenched apart, you know? And at this one, I started thinking of maybe the other way around. Maybe Cooper would be getting subdued because you've got Freddy Krueger, this sort of master of people's fears. You know, what if he was overcoming Alice Cooper? Because, like in the old school comic books of Alice Cooper books, he was being overcome, just like on a stage show. Someone else is latching him up, putting him in a straitjacket. Someone else is whipping him and beating him. So I figured maybe in that classic fashion, I could play off of the Freddy Krueger surrealism stuff and sort of extend and prolong his proportions, like when he was really creepy, running down the alleyway, dragging his hands along. So I started thinking of doing that, using the more ethereal side of Krueger in that picture. Wasn't too content with it, so I moved on. I decided to go more of like a gritty comic book cover style and try to do like a real stream close-up. So I've got a close-up of one hand, or of one head, a close-up of the other head, so like I'm framing my sketch here. And I know like down here I'd captured the motion. I wanted his claws predominant in view. So if I had this extreme close-up where I've got one head tilted down, got the other head coming down from above, and have these claws right extreme in the foreground, kind of resemblant of the Wolverine picture I did a while back. So that'll give me an over-the-shoulder shot of this person down here, which would be Krueger. And then I also thought, because of the other stuff Alice Cooper uses on stage, what about a snake? So I actually pieced in this thumbnail right here, the snake biting him on the face. Because they usually bite the heads, any kind of constrictor, they bite the head of their victim, wrap around the body. So then I figured this right here would be like the snake's body wrapping around his neck, wrapping around his arm. So that's constricting his movement, holding him back. Meanwhile, I hadn't even really done anything up here for Cooper besides putting in his fist down below. And maybe his arm and his fist were like holding back the claws somehow with like the riding crop, barring against his wrist or something. The more I thought about that, I thought, well, that's too easy to overcome. Even somebody with just claws would be able to be like, hey, stop holding on to my wrist with a stick. The other flaw I had is if I wanted to do this dynamic enough, this stick is going to be so overlapping that face, if I were to show it in a natural proportion, it would just become convoluted in the center of the piece there. It would start overlapping things I didn't want it to overlap. So then I started finding a middle ground. I pulled out of the extreme close-up. I zoomed in from the initial, from across the room look, and I found some kind of middle ground. And this time I decided to leave the frame out of it and just sketch the pose first. So in this sketch here, I came up with, here's the grimacing face of Krueger. Angry eyes, and there's his chin. And none of these sketches am I doing any hard details apart from the more bits of information I want to remain behind. I want to start conveying more information to myself. These are like mental notes I'm making to myself. I'm adding it to the paper so I know what's there. So I stuck with the idea that the glove was in the foreground. I got these spikes, and I liked the idea that the spikes were still going back at Cooper. And I still liked the idea that Cooper's hand was sort of barring his movement. So here's his arm in the foreground. And then I started thinking, what do you do with the other arms? So over here, I've got Krueger's arm coming up across the chest, and maybe he's clutching the jacket. Like, arr. Maybe he's clutching the jacket of Cooper, like, I'll get you. And also maybe he's arm barring him, trying to push him back or something. So I still have his forearm coming towards the camera here, and his shoulder and everything, his proportions are shrinking as they're going further and further away. And of course there's his hat. And I stepped back from having the snake bite him in the face specifically, and instead, kind of like adding another teammate to the picture, I pulled his head off of Krueger and put his head back up here. And this was just a rough idea to say that maybe the snake was done coiling around him and strangling him, And even the snake was taking a moment to sort of hiss in his face, like, I gotcha! I gotcha, you're not going anywhere! I'm a snake! So again, I'm still barely doing anything with Cooper's body at this point. I just know that I want him to tie down the claw, and his snake is overcoming his opponent. So there's Alice Cooper's hair. And I know I wanted them like a real knockdown drag out. So even in this middle shot right here, I wanted to get across the idea that he's sort of knocked him to the ground. Which, if I really want to get into details with his legs, I knew it would just be a matter of bracing Cooper's legs wide apart, and therefore we know he has a powerful stance. And then it would just be a matter of sort of bunching up Kruger's legs so it looks like he's off balance. So he's not directly standing on his feet the way he should be. So then after I had this pose down, and the way the camera's viewing it now, I could now tilt it till it was to the dynamic angle that I wanted it. And when I found it to that angle, that's when I went ahead and framed in. So I knew the proportion on the overall page. I knew the overall proportion I would need for the final sketch. And still, did not move on to the final sketch yet. These are all light thumbnails. Still didn't even move on to the final sketch. I forced myself onto a piece of black and just white paper and forced myself right into working shadows. I also worked out a couple of other minor details with this one. For instance, the snake. Now Kruger's hand is no longer barring Alice Cooper's chest. Instead, his hand is actually holding back the snake. Like, get it away from me. Showing a little bit of mortal aspects to Kruger, that he used to be a man, and even he might have a thing against, I may not feel this, but I just don't want a snake biting me and strangling me. So he's trying to hold it off. So here's the snake hissing with a basic angry face. No real details on Kruger. I kind of already established that he would definitely not be satisfied, say he has a real bad grimace in this picture. So I'm not focusing much on his grimace in this one. Instead, with this thumbnail, what I'm focusing on is the big claw in the foreground. Because now I've changed it up. I finally let go of Alice Cooper's hand, holding back the clawed hand. And instead, I went for something that's a bit more Alice Cooper. The big leather boot, stomping on something. So here I've got the toes of his leather boot going up, coming down in his heel. And something I definitely considered is it's really easy to focus on this glove with all these claws so much that we're going to lose the fact that the foot is holding it down. It might just become an object behind it, and then the viewer won't really see it that well. So I took that into consideration. The shading that I planned for the glove and for the fingers, I planned to be a lot more harsh, very, very dark, and yet simple. Not a whole lot of details. And then the shading I intended for the boot, I intended to be very basic. So it has more highlights on it, so it'll pop forward. So instead of being hidden behind these claws, because there's still lighter surfaces on it, it should pop forward and we'd be able to see it fairly predominantly. So again, with the perspective, I toyed with his arm going back to his shoulder, his torso twisted, and then I decided to add a bit more of like a shoulder tissue of the furthest shoulder reaching back, because as I turn away and I wrench that shoulder back, you'll start to see some of that tissue on that other side. Shoulder muscle, back muscles, something other, because he's completely wrenching his shoulders back behind his own spine. He's not hunching forward, he's completely outstretched. He's got one arm pulled one way, and he's trying to grip and pull the snake the other direction. So with that, I have his forearm hidden behind his head, his upper arm kind of extended back a bit, attached to the back piece there. Now Cooper, I went ahead and gave him the clutching of the shirt thing. I've got you, gripping and pulling the shirt here. So that if I was to pull back and show you, you can see how Alice Cooper is more predominantly in charge of this fight. He still has one leg going off to the side, while he has the other leg he's firmly standing on right on top of this glove. Now, as you may notice, I really didn't look at any references at this point while I'm still doing these sketches. I'm still not looking for direct references. I'm just capturing the story I want to tell. I did that so much that I did not realize his thumb does not have a claw. He doesn't have 5 claws, he only has 4. So even in this stage, I'm just capturing the mood and the energy of the fight so much, I'm not really interested in costume details. I just kind of knew he had stripes on his shirt, and Alice Cooper wears long coats. So capturing the energy of Cooper lifting his arm up I have his coat trailing behind that energy, flowing behind. These are the equivalent of putting action lines right on your own page. Loose clothing helps you do that. That's why people draw capes. It helps you capture action lines. That was a blister. Look at that thing. That's nasty. Sorry about that. So here's his arm wrenching up and capturing that same energy as well. I knew that I didn't want the riding crop to be straight. I want it to be stressed, as though it's currently in motion. So I captured a bit of grimace on his mouth, energy in his arm. His whole torso is rolled away. This right here is my center line for the torso, so I know where the pectorals are going to be and where the rib cage was going to be. And then the abs and stuff would just get lost into the actual wrinkles of the shirt. And it's unimportant where the rest of his body connects, because it's so important to show that this knee attaches back to the upper part of the leg to the butt. I wanted to make sure that I didn't just draw this right here and then draw a body coming down behind it. If I did that, we'd be looking at what is this, a random boot sitting on him? What is this? So I wanted to make sure it is attached to Alice Cooper. We do see it attaching, and that's where his body is wrenching towards. So overall, again, this was a very basic sketch, and then once I was done with this basic sketch, I went right in fearlessly with that Sharpie. I picked a light source, top right, because I knew the shadows, or top left, because I knew the shadows on the bottom right would really make these claws pop out by being able to see that kind of shiny surface. And it would also give me a nice shadowy surface on the other side of the leg, so this huge highlight running down the front of it will help it pop forward. Alright, so enough of all that stuff. The actual final piece of work, which is uploaded on my Twitter account. It's also uploaded on my Facebook if you'd like to go ahead and see that. So here's the top part of the sketch. Maybe bring it in a little bit closer here so you can see more detail. So now it was at this point, once I got it all laid in, I was far more concerned about the details. I pulled up a reference for what a snake's head would look like, pulled up a reference for what Alice Cooper's leathery hat, top hat and leather jacket looked like. I want to make sure I captured the actual threads, the little seams here that are on his actual lapels, as well as the seams for his shoulder, for the sleeve of the jacket. I wanted to make sure that once I got into texturing as well for all these lights and shadows, that I textured it much differently between his sweater and how I textured the snake. I didn't want to just do cross-hatching for everything, just cross-hatch or solid shadows. I would definitely want to change that up. So that's why the shadows on the blades are like long, smooth strokes, because I want them to look like they're sharp. I want them to look like they're fierce blades. But then the shading on the actual metal parts of the fingers, like his gauntlets, I want it to look almost like a brushed steel, or almost like it's a cold forged piece of steel. Maybe he just lopped pieces off of a pipe, who knows. So this very rough piping, that might be his fingers, I wanted that to have a different texture than the actual texture of the blades. Same premise for his leather pants. His black leather pants I wanted to look different than the black leather on the boots, because these almost come off like spandex, or not spandex, but like latex. They're almost like a black latex pleather kind of thing, whereas his boots might actually be genuine leather. So then even the pants that I put on a Kruger, I wanted those to read like cloth slacks or possibly khakis or something. So I wanted them to have a soft source of shadow. His shoes as well, I wanted to look differently even from the soles of Cooper's boot. So that's why I put on the these little like pyramid, like grommets that you can staple right into the belts that they have up and over. It was one of his boots I've seen him wear on stage, references, so draw from all those kind of references, I've sort of pieced together this hybrid costume of Alice Cooper's. So then again, here we have the snake wrapping around his neck twice, up and over his shoulder, and then we see the tail of it coming out from behind his arm. So I did give it kind of a short length. If I made it seem too long and just kept putting rings around him, then this snake's head would be far more gigantic than just that. So I kept that in mind, given the proportion of what his head's going to be. I kept in mind the proportion of the rest of his body and how the tail sort of tapers out real quick. It doesn't draw out to a long, thin point. It does this short little lump kind of thing right at the very end. So if you'd like to see this in high detail, again, I have this uploaded on my Facebook as well as my Twitter account. And I don't believe I've uploaded it yet to my DeviantArt, but go ahead and take a look for it there. This has been my process, just taking it from idea to thumbnail to more detailed thumbnail and just kind of working it through. It's not everybody's process, but try it yourself. Be fearless. Embrace the eraser. Do not be afraid to erase. It does not mean you made a mistake. What it means is you're honing it down to the thing you actually want. Get rid of the stuff you don't want. That's what the eraser's for. Think of it like this is for drawing in shadows. This is for drawing in highlights. That's all. You can shade to your heart's desire like I did down Alice Cooper's boot. And even if your shading gradient lines don't quite line up and some are longer and shorter than the other, take the eraser, get rid of them, so that they all have the exact edge that you want. That's all you're doing is you're drawing in highlights. Give it a try. Thumbnails, thumbnails, thumbnails like crazy. Never be intimidated by the heroes that you want to draw, because they are all basic shapes. So I'll see you next time. Look forward to making another video for you guys. This has been Learn to Draw Comics with Nick Fights here in Lead Base Studios. Later.